Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We appreciate it. This is the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee, the whole meeting for February 11th, 2014. Christine, can we please have a roll call?
Mark Berry.
Present.
Henshaw.
Present.
Susan Wright.
Present.
Julie Godfrey.
Present.
Trevor Rosen. Rich Hay.
Okay, we have quorum, so call to order. We can begin. Let's see. We're going to start with an opportunity for anybody who would like to address the board. As always, we welcome comments from parents and staff and constituents. Anyone addressing the board is asked to be courteous and respectful. Individuals are asked to approach the board, state your name, address, and address for the record. Tonight, because of the crowd, we're going to say that public comments will be limited to approximately 30 minutes per person. We'll try to be flexible, but due to time constraints and at the discretion of the board president, the total amount of public comment may be limited. So if anybody would like to start the evening out with a comment, please feel free. We're also going to offer time throughout after the big presentation tonight on the research from Northwestern. We'll offer another opportunity for public comment. And then again, at the end of the evening, we'll offer an opportunity for public comment. So if anybody wants to say anything now? If not, we'll get right into the presentation from Northwestern. And this is going to be about a 30-minute presentation. It'll be about 15 minutes of Q&A for the board afterwards. And then we'll open it up to public comment after that. So with that, I'd like to introduce.
Yes, I'd like to introduce Dr. Eric Calvert, who is from Northwestern Center for Talent Development, and he will present his findings on our gifted study from this year.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right, so the purpose of our study here is to kind of do a little bit of a formative assessment in terms of where the district is in terms of meeting the needs of its gifted and academically advanced students. We've kind of framed this in the context of developing a continuum of services. And we'll get into, when we dive into the data a little bit later in the presentation, we'll talk about why it's important to think about what you might be able to provide here in Lake Bluff beyond kind of the traditional view of the gifted education program that you and I probably grew up with, where the concept was, gifted education was something that you did on Tuesday afternoon for your assigned hour, from like 1 to 2 o'clock, and then the rest of the time, everybody got what everybody got. And then what happened in that program, regardless of how far advanced you were or in what area your strengths were, you kind of did the same thing. And the data that we'll talk about, really shows that there's a very wide range of student needs, even within the top range of students here in Lake Bluff. Before I get too far into this, I do want to just take a moment to acknowledge all of the time that people here have already contributed to this study. We've done multiple focus groups that had strong turnouts from parents who spent a long time talking with us. We've had great response rates on the survey, which we'll share the data from with you, and then we've also had very open doors for the observations that we've done here. And everybody's been very open in terms of letting us have access to all of the data that we want to have access to visit the places that we wanted to go, and particularly taking time to provide a lot of written comments that provided some really useful context for understanding some of the things that we were seeing in the numbers. So the purpose of our project was kind of threefold. And again, the idea was to create an initial snapshot with the idea that we want to be able to track progress over time, so that we know that we're not just spinning our wheels, but we want things to get measurably better over the next several years for gifted and advanced students in the district. So the three things that we were looking at formatively is, first of all, how are students doing academically today? What's the range of needs? What's the range of strengths? And we'll talk about how we did that in just a moment. Secondly, we wanted to get kind of some broad input on what people saw as the values and priorities, so that the district can be strategic about where it focuses its initial efforts. and then what are the priorities for improvement. And the good news, just to kind of preview the later part of the presentation, there was actually a surprising amount of consensus about what some of those steps should involve. So that bodes well, I think, for work that can come up next for all of you. So the focus here was to be formative versus summative. This wasn't meant to pass a letter grade or to put a stamp of approval on the program, but rather to just kind of talk about where things are now and how people felt about the programming. We use multiple data sources. Above grade level assessment, we'll talk about why that's important here just in a moment. Many of you completed the online survey. There were two parallel versions, one that went to educators and one that went to parents. We had over 100 responses on the survey to parents and I think 45 responses on the educator survey. So we got a lot of feedback and a lot of data to draw on there. And those surveys were designed to reflect the National Association for Gifted Children's best practice standards for K-12 gifted education programs. Hopefully we'll be able to reuse that survey in the future as one of the measuring sticks that we use to track what kind of progress is happening here. And then a lot of qualitative kinds of data collection as well. Those conversations with focus groups. We did focus groups with parents that many of you participated in. We also did focus groups with teachers at those schools, a lot of individual meetings with different members of the staff over the last several months that have kind of informed what you're going to see tonight. And then also looked at a lot of documents, kind of historical records, kind of past initiatives, with education, kind of get a sense of where things have been in the past and where we might go in the future. So first let's look at the assessment results. We had many of the academically advanced students here at the elementary school and the middle school participate in the NewMax program, which is Northwestern University's Midwest Academic Talent Search. One of the things that's important to understand about NewMax is that it's designed to use above grade level assessment. And the reason for that is that for the most advanced students, a lot of the assessments that are designed to be used at grade level have what the assessment world they refer to as ceiling effects. So those tests would be very accurate and reliable for the middle part of the population, but then when you try to get into that top 2 to 5%, the accuracy of those tests and the reliability of those tests start to become kind of compromised. So a good analogy is to kind of think about it in terms of your field of vision. We have our eyes are designed to see very clearly the things that are in the center of our field of vision. But if you try to put text out in your periphery, you notice that it's a lot blurrier. And those tests have those same kinds of issues when you try to assess outlier kinds of populations. And so the students here took the ACT, middle school students participated in the ACT. That's the same ACT that graduating seniors take as they're applying to high schools. Applying to colleges and universities. And then the elementary school students took the Explore test, which is a test made by the same organization that produces the ACT, and it's based on the same design blueprint. It uses the same scoring structure. So one of the advantages of using that is as you see some of those elementary school students move on into the middle school, you'll be able to use that same set of assessments to be able to understand how they're progressing over time. And then the other advantage of using the above grade level assessment is that it takes the differences between those top 2 to 3 percentiles of students that you have in the district and really explodes those. So on a grade level test, you see some students are at the 99th percentile and some students are at the 98th percentile. That's within the measure of error of those assessments. So you really can't accurately say that this student is more advanced than this other student. What you can say is this student and this other student are at about the same level, and one of those students might be a little bit more advanced, or they might have guessed correctly on one item that the other student guessed incorrectly on, or one person had a better breakfast than the other. But when you use the much more advanced test, it really expands that range of difference and gives you more insight into how those areas that the students are like and the areas that they're different. It gives you some data you can actually differentiate for that top 5 percentile, that top 5 to 10% based on. So let's actually look at the data then. And you have this in your handouts as well, which might be a little bit easier for you to read. But we basically compared Lake Bluff students to 2 other comparison sets. So Lake Bluff students are the green line in all of these slides. We compared your students to our entire comparison population of students for the last 2 years. All of the students that participate in new maths are academically advanced. So the comparison pool that you're looking at, these are all students who are either at or above the 90th percentile on a nationally normed test, who have been identified for a school-based gifted program, or in Illinois, they exceed the threshold to be at the exceeds level on the ISAT assessment. When you see a student that's at the 50th percentile in new maths, that doesn't mean they're an average student. That means they're average for the top 5 to 10% of the overall population. Does that make sense? Okay. So the blue line is obviously all of our students, so that's going to be the 50th percentile for our comparison sample. We basically created a pool of all of our students that participated in these assessments over the last 2 years. So there are about 40,000 students in that pool. And then the red line that you see, we also did kind of an extraction of the rest of our population of students who were at districts that were in the same quartile of poverty level as Lake Bluff. So it's kind of an attempt to do kind of an apples-to-apples comparison, kind of factoring in some very basic socioeconomic characteristics, because as we know, there's a strong association between poverty and so then in reading, this was actually, yes. There were about 40,000 students in the overall population, the blue line. There were about 95 students here in Lake Bluff that participated in one of the assessments. And I don't recall the number off of my head for the comparison number, but it's probably in the neighborhood of 5,000 students. And we kind of, we took any student from any institution that was at that same level. So it's kind of a compilation of students from all over the Midwest that attend economically similar schools. So what you'll notice overall is...
You said only 95 students from how many was it offered to? And was that, of those 95, were they potentially the top 5% of instead of the top 10%?
Yeah, we invited, about 105, 110 students to participate. And that was based on, my understanding was they basically went through ISAT and MAP scores to select students that would be qualified based on those scores to participate in the events. And the goal was to use essentially the same criteria locally as we use in the rest of the sample. That way, we could make good, sound comparisons between students here and students.
Okay. My question is basically, if you offered it to our top 10%, did they all take an average, or was it only on top 5% actually got accepted to the test? So you got a selection of this data set.
I don't think, the number of families who opted into participating based on the number invited was so high that, I wouldn't, I don't think we looked systematically at whether students that were on the lower end of that invitation list were more likely to opt out. My guess is that it was fairly random and kind of based more on personal preference than achievement level, or in some cases for the ACT, whether or not they had a conflict on Saturday morning when those tests are offered. So,
You did it with 95, that was 10% of our population. You have about 10 people from that test.
Okay, so
So we felt pretty good about that. So we'll kind of go through this subject area by subject area, kind of following the structure of the ACT and Explore. Reading was probably the strongest area, and I think this probably reflects somewhat what the focus has been in terms of curriculum development in the early stages of the transition to Common Core. You can see, compared even to economically similar schools, Lake Bluff students as a group are consistently and significantly outperforming other students participating in our program now. I think probably part of what fuels that is that ACT and Explore are the test blueprint, which is basically the kinds of knowledge and skills that they attempt to assess. Those items are based by what ACT's research suggests are predictive of success in higher education. The ACT was designed essentially to help colleges and universities predict what kind of students are going to be successful in programs. But as you can see, as we move up into the 8th grade, the average Lake Bluff student was at the 70th percentile of our entire population. So that's an area that we should feel pretty good about, and I think that reflects the fact that Common Core is highly aligned with college-ready standards, and that's also what we're attempting to measure with the assessment. So in terms of where you're going in terms of curriculum alignment, I think that's a positive sign about the general curriculum. On math, a little bit closer.
Can I just ask a question along the lines of what I was asking? Did we offer testing to everybody who would have tested under the new maths standards? I thought it was some higher population.
We offer based on the questions recommendation for the groups that exceeded in both math and
In both math and reading, right? And I had thought earlier that you could test under new maths if you were at 95% in one or the other.
You can, but for the purposes of this study, in order for us to have comparison data,
Yeah.
we needed to follow their recommendations and do what they
So I'm just speaking to whether this is apples to apples comparison, because it might have been our top of the top.
Right.
And a slightly bigger swath of the population in that 40,000 that you're talking about.
I see what you're saying. I mean, I'm fairly confident that it's a pretty apples-to-apples comparison set. And if anything, we might have actually been a little bit more inclusive, or maybe a little bit more inclusive with our Illinois schools, because we will accept any student who is at the exceeds level, and that's actually, it varies a little bit by grade level, but it's typically between actually about the 82nd and the 85th percentile. So it actually expands that a little bit beyond what some of the students in our other states. And we serve basically an 8-state region, including all of the Great Lakes states and the Mid-Atlantic are the states that we serve through our college. So we looked at math, things were a little bit closer there. And then looking at the composite score, so this is the overall score. Again, we saw pretty good news for the district overall in terms of what the mean score of your gifted students was compared to our other gifted students. So what does that mean? To provide a little bit of context, we've already been talking about. Yes, sir. I can only go forward. If my multitasking, multi-talented assistant will. Their comparison group is other students that are in their same grade level now. I noticed that pattern as well. Sure. Right.
There are only 20 kids in each one of these pockets. If we have 95, there's 5 different grades. We're talking about 20 able to.
Small population. What it
Right,
also
Yeah.
exactly.
consists of-
And that's probably the most likely explanation for that, because we do see that pattern overall. So even though there were over 90 students that participated overall at any one grade level, you're talking about a few dozen kids. And so if you just happen to have at one grade level a couple of students that scored, that just by virtue of being who they are, in that cohort, you see this in every school, and teachers talk about it. There are those classes that come along that just happen to have a cluster of really exceptional students in them, and other classes that don't. So like the class that graduated ahead of me in my high school was like, the awesome famous one. And that's where like the guy that invented the touchpad, the touchscreen for the iPad was in. It's like, forever, like no matter like how old I'll get, like we'll always be compared to that cohort of kids. But that's probably the most likely explanation. I mean, I think if you do this over time, you'll have a better sense of whether that's a statistical anomaly just by virtue of a limited sample size, or if there's really something about the 7th grade curriculum that causes that temporary dip. And I would encourage you to kind of triangulate this with other sources of data that we have, that we look specifically at the above grade level assessment. But generally speaking, the takeaway is that the middle of your gifted population is doing pretty well compared to other similar kinds of districts. But probably the more important piece from a program design perspective that jumped out was that was not how the mean of your gifted students was doing, but that there was such a profound range of achievement levels, even within that top 5 to 10% of students that we looked at. And this is really the value of doing the above grade level assessment. So differences between students when you create needs of groups get washed out. But the standard deviation between Lake Bluff students worked out to be about 25 percentile points. So at the 7th or 8th grade level, that works out to be 3 to 4 grade levels of difference between your highest performing gifted students and your lowest performing gifted students. So one thing that was crystal clear is that going the one-size-fits-all program route is not going to be effective for some part of your student population. That's why we need to look at, I think, at that continuum concept, because otherwise you're going to under-challenge some kids, or you're going to overwhelm some kids that are sort of in between, needing something more than what they would get in the regular classroom or the traditional curriculum, but still they're significantly different from the students. So to kind of give a layperson's example that makes sense of this, we looked at the ACT scores of your middle school students, and what we found is that you have 6 students in your middle school that scored at or above the level of the average entering freshman at the University of Illinois Champaign or Urbana. And 2 of those students were actually 7th graders, so they've got 5 years to go in the system and are already performing at a level of entering freshmen at that university. So there's a significant challenge there that I hope is both exciting, but also maybe a little bit humbling to think about. 28. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know this is not a nice topic, but these days our students are international students, even at in-state university, they're international students because they're high school tuition. And so, do you have a numbers like students from India, China? What do you think are?
The only data that we would currently have to be able to compare your students specifically to those students would be to look at scores of students from those countries that are applying for American colleges and universities that would take the ACT or SAT, which kind of skews the sample a bit, because we know that it's the highest performing students from those countries that are looking at applying abroad. But there are some international comparison assessments. There's one that's called the TIM study, the Princeton International Math and science study. And then there's another called PISA, which is the Program in International Student Assessment. They both look at similar kinds of things, although PISA is a little bit more problem-solving based, whereas TENS is a little bit more kind of core knowledge based. Those have historically been conducted as sort of like large national research studies, so they're trying to compare countries to countries rather than schools to schools, although PISA is getting ready to offer actually a version of their assessment that schools can buy into, so that might be something to explore down the road if you're
Can I just make a recommendation that we're running along, and just in the interest of time, if everybody gets to know your questions, let's save it until he gets through his conclusions, and then we can get into the public comment section. Just so we can get through it and keep moving. Thanks, we appreciate it.
So then I'll jump ahead a little bit and talk about some of what we found on the survey that was, again, looking at people's perceptions of what these students were currently getting in relation to those best practice standards from the National Association for Gifted Children. So again, there were two surveys. They were parallel. These are the response rates that we already mentioned. We controlled the survey process, so all those responses came to me and only me. So people did have the opportunity to say what they wanted to say without worrying that they were going to be individually identified to the school, and I know that is important to a lot of people, particularly when they have some critical things to say. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there was actually surprisingly a large amount of consensus between educators and teachers in terms of some of the things that they said that they thought were true of the district today and that were most important for improving going forward. Probably the most critical finding that we found, probably the lowest rated element for the district currently by both parents and by educators, was the extent to which they felt that the process used to identify students that would receive additional support wasn't sufficiently transparent. And it really seemed, particularly in some of the focus group conversations, that this was, first of all, an area where a lot of improvement could happen fairly quickly, and secondly, until there is more of a common knowledge base and common vocabulary about what's happening, it's going to be hard to make significant progress going forward. So I think transparency and putting some things down in policy would be a great first step for improvement in the district. Similarly, we found large majorities of parents and even a small majority of educators felt confused or not fully informed about what the process was to identify students. So that's another area that we'll talk about in terms of potential for improvement. We also found kind of a mix of responses from parents about some of the things that were happening in terms of enrichment right now. And sort of the overarching trend was that for the most part, people appreciated what they got, but there wasn't enough of it, and it wasn't consistent enough. And it did seem like maybe things are spread too thin to be fully effective, and so we'll talk about some opportunities to maybe address some of that as we go as well. And then finally, one of the other things that was surprising to a certain extent is that there was a lot of agreement among both groups about the fact that they felt that the core focus of improvement efforts should really focus on improving the core curriculum for these students. So there was kind of a long wish list of things that people would like to see in terms of outside programming, in terms of additional opportunities, but there was a lot of consensus about the idea that the most important priority was to make sure that what was happening for the bulk of the school day, the regular school day, for these students would be more challenging. And then again, that was true of both parents and educators. And then one of the things that we did with the survey as well, based on the focus groups, we got a lot of suggestions of ideas in terms of things that people might like to see offered to gifted students. But then we constructed some items that force people to rank those in order of priority, because we know that there's limited resources. So if you could only do a handful of these, at least out of the gate, what would be most important to you. And so educators very strongly said professional development to help us do a more effective job differentiating for these students jumped out as number one. Second was improving policies and procedures for selecting these students, but also to provide more information to them about the abilities and needs of these students to inform what they were trying to do from a differentiation perspective. And then their third priority was improving the English language arts curriculum for gifted and advanced students. And you'll see a lot of these things reappear when we talk about educators' priorities as well. Again, professional development for themselves was important. They put math curriculum slightly ahead of English language arts as a priority. And then fourth, they also said that policies and procedures to make what was being offered more transparent. I'm sorry, parents. Thank you. Distributed cognition. I'm going to talk about what should be the emphasis for sort of the next stages of improvement. The one area where we didn't see consensus, in fact, we saw a really stark contrast in terms of perceptions of parents and educators, is we asked both groups, what should be the priority, the highest priority for the most advanced students? Should it be providing more enriching experiences within the grade level curriculum, or should it be providing opportunities for students to access more advanced levels of curriculum? 2-to-1, parents said, we want access to the more advanced levels of curriculum. Educators were the flip of that. They said 2-to-1, we should focus on enriching within the grade level curriculum. So I think this is one area where there's going to be some opportunities for rich conversation between stakeholder groups. I will say, that's a nice one, isn't it? But I will say some of the comments of the educators suggested that how they answered the question was somewhat driven by the students that they envisioned when they were answering it. Because we did get a lot of comments from educators, both on the survey as well as in the focus groups, where they said, well, we feel like we're doing a pretty good job for what some refer to as moderately advanced or mildly gifted students, but the students that we're doing the least effective job with right now are the students that are most advanced. And I think there's probably a fair amount of consensus on that in terms of both stakeholder groups. So, some recommendations about where we might go from here. First, to summarize some of the key findings. Again, first step, getting more clarity around what you're trying to accomplish with the programming for these students, and to make things more transparent in terms of how students are assessed and how they're identified for these additional opportunities. I think will go a long way to providing a foundation for better collaboration across all the stakeholder groups. And it's really an essential part if you want to be able to measure improvement going forward. You have to know what you're trying to accomplish and what data you're going to use to guide that further assessment. The second thing that we found is that, and this was a positive finding, is that it looks like overall the transition into the new Common Core standards, the district's doing a pretty good job on in terms of being ahead of similar districts in terms of implementing the new standards. Now, obviously, there's a lot of room for improvement now that that core foundation of rigorous content is there for the middle of the population to then further differentiate that out so it's better serving the full range of students, particularly those most advanced students. And then finally, the current approach to enrichment, while it does have benefits, and what most people said is that they would like more of it, it seems in many ways that maybe more students are trying to be served with too few resources, and the end result of that winds up being that the dosage of service that a lot of students get isn't really sufficient to fully meet their needs. And so looking at ways to combine acceleration with differentiation and enrichment all together is going to be an essential part. And I think everybody kind of recognized the limitations that are there now. So then we'll kind of talk about like 3 sets of recommendations. One that looks at structures. So the first suggestion is to formally embrace kind of a modern continuum of services concept that acknowledges that gifted students are not all alike and they'll need different things, and then look at developing a range of services that will meet those individualized needs, starting with continuing the work to develop a cognitively complex core curriculum, but with better opportunities to differentiate based on that. A third component is the need to recognize that gifted students aren't always gifted in all areas, and in fact, there are often students who have gifts in one area and even specific disabilities in other areas, but oftentimes in terms of how programming is structured or support systems are structured, special education is over here and gifted education is over here, but the two never meet, and so it's important as you think about support systems to make sure that those students that need supports and accommodations to address disabilities, that those services and supports can actually follow them into the programming that's there to support those areas of strength where they need opportunities to enrich and go further. Grouping seems like an opportunity to do more efficiently, and one of the constraints that you have is that you're not an enormous district, and so there's a critical mass kind of issue to consider here. But one of the things that seems to be working well within the limited scale that is currently being implemented is attempts to group students that have similar needs, but how that's being done again needs to be made more transparent. It needs to be used more frequently, and that may actually include for some of your most advanced students thinking outside the box a little bit in terms of multi-age grouping. So if students need to be with older students to find a peer group that is at a similar academic level, as long as those students are socially and emotionally ready to work with those students, that can be a solution. And then maybe looking at some online programming as well to meet the needs of students where you don't have a critical mass to be able to, frankly, afford to be able to assign, a teacher to work with a class of 1 or 2 students. With online programs, you can create, economies of scale to meet some of those needs a little bit more cost effectively. But in terms of thinking about what kinds of support systems would be helpful, first of all, one of the things again that we found is that it seemed like the enrichment teachers are really spread too thin to be as effective as anybody would likely to be, including themselves. And so one of the things we might suggest, and we do think that there are some strengths with the school-wide enrichment model that the school is attempting to implement, but in terms of providing opportunities for enrichment for all, parents of gifted students were clear that they do want all students to have opportunities for interest-based enrichment. They do want opportunities for all students to develop their strengths no matter how extreme or typical those might be. But then there still needs to be opportunities for those students that are especially advanced to not be constrained by the limitations of that program. So we're really kind of talking about developing sort of a tiered approach that would combine elements of school-wide enrichment for all, so students can reveal their strengths, but then also looking for opportunities for students to move above and beyond. And so we think kind of taking that school-wide enrichment model maybe off of the back somewhat, the enrichment specialists, so that they can focus more on meeting the needs of those more advanced students might be a helpful approach within the resources that we have right now. Secondly, we think there's a lot of opportunities to maybe do more with technology, particularly at the middle school. You basically have a one-to-one level of access. We did see a lot of teachers in the classrooms making some good use of those for some project-based learning, but I think there's opportunities also to connect students with learning opportunities beyond the school, since those resources are there, and also to provide more transparency to what students are doing in school, so that parents can feel more informed and be more collaborative partners with their teachers and with the school district going forward. To continue use of above grade level assessment, again, so that you can monitor how these needs and abilities are developing over time. And one of the things that we do see is that the development of talents aren't always linear. Sometimes you do have students that make these giant leaps in short periods of time, so being able to track that as one of the measures of improvement we think would be valuable. And finally, we think that to coordinate a continuum of services model. One of the things about the old school model of everybody goes to room 6 for the gifted program was that it was administratively easy to do. All you have to do is coordinate the schedule, but when you're trying to provide a continuum of programming that meets the needs of gifted students and to make efficient and creative use of a lot of different resources, it does take some administrative leadership. So one recommendation that we've suggested would be to explore staffing, a district level leadership position, whether that's dedicated to Lake Bluff alone, or whether for a cost savings, you explore teaming into a consortium with a neighboring district. Particularly Lake Forest might be an option, since there would also be an opportunity to articulate some programming into high school, but we do think that that would be valuable. Because again, there are a lot of people here that are doing good work and trying to do a lot of things, but can't be in the classroom and also coordinating at the same time as ideally would like to be. And then finally, some recommendations in terms of policies. And this would go a long way, we think, to addressing some of the issues with transparency and just getting everybody on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish and what the goals are of the programming. But first, to formalize the policies and procedures that you want to use for identifying these students, both from the perspective of just making it feel more transparent to everyone involved, but more importantly, so that people can use data and that comprehensive profile of students to guide what they're trying to do on behalf of students in whatever role it is they play in the system. And then finally, because we do recognize that particularly for those students that are multiple grade levels advanced, even from other gifted students in the school district, it's not realistic for particularly a 7th or 8th grade teacher to deal with the full range of needs. Even the most dedicated, most knowledgeable teacher with the best professional development and the best resources will struggle to meet the needs of 8 or 9 effective grade levels of students in the same place. So looking for opportunities to provide some acceleration for those students who are outliers, even among your gifted students. And, there is again kind of a continuum of possibilities there, from looking at early inclusive kindergarten for some students that we know are ready for school before that 5th birthday, whole grade acceleration for those students that are really just ready to move up to a more advanced grade level, looking at opportunities to accelerate with individual subject areas. And this is where that district level coordinator becomes really important, because now you're talking about coordinating some things schedule-wise, potentially between multiple teachers. And then finally, for some students, looking at opportunities for mastery-based progress, maybe to be used in combination with some of these other forms of acceleration. So for example, when you look at a content area like math, where students are very far advanced in some areas, but learning math is a very sequential process, skipping large chunks of it can sometimes lead to problems, but if you can provide an opportunity for students to move through certain elements of the curriculum more quickly than a student that might not otherwise be a great candidate for acceleration, can be well prepared to make that transition. And then finally, some recommendations related to professional development. I know we'll be talking more about this. But one thing that I would caution you, and I know everybody wants to move as quickly as possible. You see unmet needs for these students, and we want to do an effective job for them. And we do recommend intensive professional development focused on helping teachers design well-differentiated curriculum that meets the needs of these students. The one thing that I will say is that most of the national research on implementing differentiation effectively in schools suggests that it's minimally a 2-year-long process of intensive professional development for teachers, followed by opportunities for teachers and gifted specialists to work together intensively to co-design appropriate curriculum so they can fit it into the overall scope and sequence, and then have opportunities for coaching. There have been a lot of people who have attempted to speed that process up, and what they tend to find is that they can reach a level of familiarity with the vocabulary of differentiation for teachers fairly quickly, but as soon as the professional development ends, they start to see it disappear, and they don't see, if you go back to those schools a year or two after the professional development episode, what you see in the classroom before and after looks almost exactly the same. So you can waste a lot of time and a lot of resources trying to move quickly. So this is one area where we would recommend patience and deliberate work. And so you might want to identify one area of curriculum at a time where you really want to focus your resources and energy to develop that. Okay, so that's in a nutshell what we found, and I'm sure there'll be further conversations about this, but we'll answer a few questions.
Thanks, Dr. Talbot. We appreciate your time. And I want to start by saying we're going to have to entertain a couple minutes of questions from the board and then public comment. And I want to start that off by asking Dr. Sophie a question about if she could explain to the board as well as the audience, where does the district stand logistically in all this in terms of planning and what's next and what is coming and what we intend to present to
Not too distant future, I'll define that. That's not tomorrow, but it's in the very, very near future. First of all, we're going to need to meet as an administrative team with our specialist teachers and go through the recommendations. Someone that I know really wants to be involved with this is our new elementary school principal, because she also has a lot of background in this area. At that point, as I've already talked to Dr. Calvert about meeting with him, he will be working with us on putting together an identification process that is based upon best practice and what they recommend for school districts. Once the identification process is put together, it's our job to come up with this continuum of service. It's like the what next. And we have to really look at what we're going to do for students that are above grade level, to remember how big that differentiation is for some of our highest students. One of the things that we're going to need to work on, which again Northwestern can provide us guidance, is looking at the kids that are truly outliers, and that's not a bad term. That would be 2 standard deviations above where our other kids are. We need to do something different for them. The future Dr. Rubenstein, who I think hopefully by the end of our March meeting will be a doctor, has already let parents know that we will be implementing a parent-teacher, administrator kind of parent group that will talk about different issues. And I've also talked to Dr. Calvert about many of their opportunities to combine partnerships as far as offering sites, look at some of their curriculum online, and actually coming in and providing some of the professional development for us and offering coaching to our teachers. So it's an exciting time to have kids in the district, and many of our kids excel in one area or more. And one of the exciting things I think about it is we'll look at flexible groups, because as Dr. Calvert said, not all kids are gifted in all areas, but we really have to be looking at each child individually, so that continuum of service is important. I really think the report is very beneficial, and we look forward to a long partnership. I'm sure our parents feel that way too. I know our board has some questions, and then we're going to open to see if there's any. I will tell parents that if you have any questions from this, please feel free to email me. My email's on our website, and we're going to try to put together some kind of a fact sheet for you so we can get answers, and they'll be posted on our website. You'll be hearing a lot more about this in the future. So, board questions.
I guess the question I have is about timing. You know, and I understand that it takes time to change things, but I think people would also be wondering, when could this possibly benefit a child who's in our school today? And, you know, if it looks like we can't do something broader, you know, it frustrates me to see that this sounds like something that's going to take a year or two to get moving. And what are we going to do with kids that are, you know, coming along right now? Is there more we can do with technology we have available to offer something more currently?
I really think that's the question parents are asking too, because I'm seeing a lot of nodding of heads. It's important that we get together and kind of talk through these. This is the first time our administrators have seen it. Kevin and I both got the recommendations at the end of last week, so we haven't even had time. But we will be setting up a meeting with Northwestern within the next month to get the identification process set prior to the end of the school year. We do have a couple of our students that are 2 standard deviations or above that we need to make some decisions placement-wise for next year. And I think it's time that we talk to Northwestern about what they can offer as far as professional development for our teachers. And I want to sit down and go through it with our enrichment teachers because they may have some ideas that we can really work on now when our teachers are working on their English language arts curriculum. Many of you may have seen ELA in the slides. ELA stands for English Language Arts. But there are things that we could be just refining and working on with our consultants now. So many of the items that you're going to see, we'll start the parent-teacher group prior to the end of the school year. When we start looking at curriculum, I know there are some curricular offerings online technology-wise that Northwestern can help us with. That I would see as more doing some research on. I have already talked to Dr. Calvert about, in fact, I'm trying to twist your arm a little bit to see if we could be a site for some of their classes on the weekend. I think we could probably get a good sized group, but we'll keep working on that. That's one of the first things I heard when I came here, get them as a site. So I think what I'd like to do is the very first thing, we'll need to set up a meeting with Dr. Calvert, with our administrators and our enrichment specialists, and come up with a timeline so that we can show parents we're going to do these things this year, we're going to do these things next year, and then evaluate the outcomes next year. That's part of our strategic plan. Every year then, we keep evaluating and improving. So I would say there's going to be some things that are already starting in April. But it's not going to happen tomorrow. By April.
So things will happen by April in terms of the adults having conversations. I guess my question is, when would it make any difference for students?
As I shared, it's going to be making a difference for students when they work with the consultants. Some of these recommendations our enrichment specialists can be working on now with our consultants, and we still have many curricular times available that our staff are already being in service, and so we can start that now, because as soon as we meet with enrichment specialists, as they learn their English language arts curriculum and math curriculum, they can start putting some of these things in place now. I think the big piece is going to be developing the timeline that meets the needs of kids as soon as possible, but also gives us time to be thoughtful instead of rushing and not doing the job that I think would be quality, to make sure it's sustainable.
Jean, related to that, I think one of the most stunning statistics in this report to me is that only 7% of parents and 23% of educators agree that goals have been identified, and 74% of parents don't understand how students are identified for enrichment opportunities and additional support. It seems to me that's an early opportunity to communicate so that the parents understand what people are selected, what is already available out there. Is that something that we can get to?
That, as I said, that's step 2. After we do our timeline, the very first thing we need to do is develop our identification process, and then it needs to be communicated.
Yeah, don't we have something now? We have some infrastructure already. It'd be helpful to know what we
Do you want to
have
handle
in
that?
baseline.
So we do have some infrastructure in place right now, and we have some, I wouldn't even call them pilot groups, but for example, at a grade level, some of the teachers approached us about the possibility of some students moving to the next grade level in math already. Their math scores in the winter were just far and away above the rest of the students, not only at that grade level, but at the next grade level and the next grade level after that. And so we started to take a look at that, not just for the 2 students that they approached us about, but from a more systematic perspective. So what characteristics and traits do those 2 students have that would make them ideal candidates for full grade level acceleration or for full class acceleration? So we're looking at we have some of the structures in place, but in the short term we will be able to sort of articulate those policies and make them more clear both to the stakeholders within the district and then outside of the district. But the sort of systemic change of really creating a gifted and enrichment program that we can be proud of is going to take a while. And so after we create the policies, then this summer, we would anticipate that we will start to see some of the some additional gifted enrichment program offerings during summer school, and that there would be some teacher professional development that we would offer during the summer focused on meeting the needs of gifted students. So that in the fall, we have a small but growing cadre of educators in the district who are able to serve as sort of a leadership team to coach others as the process goes on.
The program currently exists at the high school level to accept these students in a smooth transition fashion.
Part of the articulation process related to identifying the process, as part of that is a conversation between Dr. Sophie, myself, and our counterparts in the high school district. We have had lots of those conversations already. I'm not sure that they fully believed us because we didn't have outstanding data to support our claims. Now we have evidence to say our kids are really great kids and you need to really rapidly prepare. So it is, in some respects, a little bit easier to do in a high school because of the fact that you can have different levels and different course offerings, and so just by the matter of being able to do that, it's going to be a little bit easier. But we fully plan to work with our counterparts in the district.
More questions?
It's probably more of a comment than a question, but it seems to me really, in order to meet the needs of this number of children, 20 in each class was tested roughly, we really had to focus on getting differentiation right. And we are a long way ahead of the curve on getting the core curriculum in place here. And so it seems to me, even though you're saying it's a 2-year process to really ingrain differentiation, we shouldn't sell short how far we are ahead on the core curriculum adoption and how fundamental that is to differentiating, right? And so we do have a handful of children who are 2 standard deviations above grade level, if that's the right term, and we definitely need to figure out ways, and I think we have some ideas about how to meet those needs. But we're really talking about, in a class of 25 different learning abilities, right? And trying to reach each and every child. And that's a continuum. It's not a class that you're going to start at 2 p.m. every afternoon and stick them in a class. It's a whole different way of teaching. And I think it strikes me that what I've learned about the core curriculum is really that ability to differentiate is different than it has been when we were kids by a long shot. And in order to meet all the needs of these kids, we're going to have to really get that right.
And again, there's variation from class to class, but one of the things that I think I was optimistic about in terms of what I saw in a lot of the classrooms was a transition towards a more conceptual kind of curriculum. In the past, a lot of I think old standards often were driven around sort of rote memorization of kind of a very fact-based curriculum. The new standards lend themselves much more to a more problem-solving based approach in math and science, to a more sort of like global conceptual approach in language arts and reading that really lend themselves a lot better in terms of potential for differentiating for a higher range or a higher level of student, or a more advanced level of student than perhaps previous standards allowed for. So I think there's been good work that's happened already towards starting to develop sort of the foundational elements of that curriculum. So there's airspace above what we have that the curriculum can grow into.
My other comment is there are incredible resources out there available through Northwestern. And we could make links to those available maybe tomorrow, maybe not tomorrow, but very, very quickly. In the online resources, the summer courses, the weekend accelerated learning courses. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there. And I appreciate the need to be moving quickly. Real change is going to take a while. But for each individual parent, there are opportunities out there to be taken advantage of.
Limited to approximately 3 minutes per person, and we will try to be flexible. But due to time constraints, total amount of public comment may be limited. In general, the board will not respond to commentary at this time. However, Dr. Calvert and our staff will respond briefly for the purposes of clarification as necessary. Please keep in mind that District 65 has not finalized any plans for implementation of these recommendations, and additional public meetings will be held as plans are developed. As a time. So we said specific questions should be directed to her at jsophie@lb65.org, and that all your questions that you do submit will be addressed in a fact that we can hold us online and at future public meetings. If anybody would like to address the board, please.
Good evening. It's Michael Manfred, 230 Norwich Court, it's more of an observation. I think these findings are great, but to me, this is really moving at a very, very slow speed. We started this process back in the fall. We've identified the kids with, in my opinion, we could have identified through ISATs or math testing, and we could predict that they would score at the levels they probably scored. So what we achieved from these findings, I'm not sure, but we basically lost, think about the 8th graders that are high potential kids. We've lost a whole year for those 8th graders. We started this process in October. Here we are in February. Nothing's going to happen between now and the end of the school year. And these plans, very fast pace. I really think we need, there's two paths I think we can go down. One is you're trying to build a program that's sustainable in the future. That's great. We're building Rome. But you also need tactical plans to address needs now. There are 4th graders that aren't going to benefit from this program. And in all due respect, I don't think we need Northwestern for everything. Do we not have experts on the board that our staff that can handle this? There's things we need to do fast, and we need to do them now. And, I think we need to balance building the long term with addressing needs. Because there's 7th graders that aren't going to benefit from this program. There's 6th graders that aren't going to benefit from this program.
Thanks. This is Joe Granda, 422 West Witchwood Lane. I'm just going to make a real quick one. I have to agree, speed-wise, we need to address these things. I think also, just as a quick point, it's our responsibility to take care of our kids. As from a school district perspective, we can't assume that for that 25 kids per class, whatever the number is, we have to step in. So what we need, so that we don't delay it, is get us those resources now so that we know exactly where we want to have it, give some solid recommendations so that we can act. Because at the end of the day, the parents, the families responsible, not the school district, for our kids' education. Okay? And then the second thing I want to point out is just that when you do start doing the longer plan, I noticed that the whole ELA was the focus, but parents were saying that math was higher than the ELA from a curriculum perspective. And a big reason is this world is technologically focused. The rest of the world is beating us, and we don't have enough engineers in this country. And if we keep focusing on the ELA, we're going to lose out long term, and we're going to be a bunch of individuals that are doing services, and all technologies can be developed elsewhere. So if we can make sure we don't lose sight of the math, and the second is obviously let's build that tactical plan now for us as parents can act on. Thank you.
You bring up a good point, though, and I did have this conversation with a couple board members today. I will work with Northwestern and get resources on our website as soon as possible, because there's a lot of things parents can enroll their kids in now, and it would be great if we could post it on our website for you to access immediately and take a look. That's also something that if parents find other classes, we would just have to say, while we don't endorse other programs, we can endorse Northwestern because they're working with us. But if you find other programs, we'd be happy to post them just to share information. And that's another thing that we're going to be doing in our parent group. So thank you for sharing.
I'm Todd Nugent, 600 Thornton Valley. First, I want to thank Eric and Kevin and Dr. Sophie and the board and Nate for doing this. I think it's really great and we'll keep this focusing on it. We have twin students that have done real well in the Northwestern tests. We've had them in some of the Saturday classes, so we've spent a fair number of Saturdays. And I highly recommend that to the rest of you. The kids love it. They get A's. They meet other kids that have the same kind of interest. So that's worked really well for us. But I want to emphasize to the board in thinking about this, there's the opportunity aspect we've talked about for the students coming into universities. I'm very aware that I teach. And we see every year the U.S. students need more remedial education compared to foreign students. Foreign students show up in a computer science program, and they already know all the math. And the U.S. students from major colleges coming to grad school, they need remedial math. So there's a kind of national problem on the math stuff. So I would echo the same comment that do consider the math. Because in some sense, I found with our twins, they can just read a lot of books, and suddenly their reading skills are good because they read the books. That's much harder than math. They can't sort of just go to a bunch of math. But then my other comment was, there's both an opportunity issue here, which I think the board and everyone probably understands that, gee, these smart kids, and we accelerate them, they'll do great things. But there's also a risk aspect to this, that what we've seen from our twins is, here they are at Northwestern doing really well in class, they're doing well in the ACT competition, getting awards there, but then some of their grades in middle school are D's, and that's not a reflection of the school, that's just, they're bored. So anyhow, there's a kind of risk issue there of really good kids don't necessarily do well in regular curriculum because they've never understood this. So I appreciate it. I just hope to encourage you in terms of considering funding and things to look at the risk aspect as well as the opportunity aspect. Thanks very much.
Anybody else?
Michael Gene Georgie, 346 East Senate. I had a couple different comments and questions. We got a lot of notification on this. We have 3 kids that have been identified for these programs. We had weeks' notice on getting our information into you guys and bringing our kids to the testing. I had 24 hours notice to find out that this was being presented today. So, you know, for all the amount of time that you asked us to input, we probably should have gone back to the parents to let them know when the results were coming out. Because there's probably 15 parents that aren't here tonight that I know would be here if they knew about it.
And we're going to be having other meetings, there will be board meetings.
Okay.
We're talking about what we're doing.
Because
That'll be more informal because I think parents want to, they want to share and then we can share it.
Okay,
And just as an aside too, this will be posted on our website as a video in a matter of a couple of days, the video of this meeting.
okay,
So
so,
parents who did miss it, they can spread the word, they can catch up.
okay. I noticed there that you didn't test the third graders. Is there going to be some plan to judge their progress? Because that's probably about the only age group here that's going to get full benefit from the program if it gets implemented over the next year or two.
Sure. I mean, we would welcome that,
Mhm.
and we do allow students as young as third grade to participate in the above grade level assessment. We can also work with you to help identify assessments that you can use for younger students. We didn't attempt to go below that level with this process because part of our concern is we want to make sure that students have a not overwhelming experience with the assessments. We don't offer a full universe of assessments within our program right now because we were trying to kind of plug into some infrastructure that we already had to kind of get things moving out of the gate now. But I know particularly as we have more conversations about what that assessment process should look like to identify students that have those additional needs, we'll, I'm sure, have conversations about what we can do to identify those emerging abilities among even younger students, because you're right, finding those students.
My comment is in reference to identifying. It's kind of, if you're going to judge this program over the next several years, it sounds like it's going to take several years to implement. They're sixth graders by that point. Maybe you'll get a score out of eighth grade and you'll know, are they statistically better off than they would have been in the old program. We heard the same thing 9 years ago with our eighth grader, and he's lost out. So when you mention it's coming in the future, a serious timeline of saying we expect an implementation of something in math by next year is useful. Giving us vague deadlines actually makes the parents more upset. Just so you know, and I know you can't commit to a timeline, but something needs to be, a commitment needs to be made, and if it's like Mr. Manfred said,
We will do our very best. I think, I've only been here for a year and a half.
okay.
Rubenstein's only been here for half a year. Doctor, notice I said that. And we are doing our very best. We just got the recommendations, and we really wanted someone that has lots of research behind them to come in and evaluate what we have. Because we can go on gut, but gut's not good enough. We have to make data-driven decisions. And I will emphasize to you, some of these changes are going to be, they're already happening, slowly. I think the data also supports the fact that our kids are still, without a structured program, are still doing very well. Can they do better? Absolutely. We all know that. And that's why we hired Northwestern to come in and work with us on that.
Okay. Not to be argumentative, but I would say that these recommendations aren't new. Because 9 years ago, I sat in a meeting and we discussed probably 90% of what we were discussing now. And none of it got implemented. So.
Well, and I wasn't here 9 years ago. We're going to do our
That's why I'm
very,
saying,
very best job with that. So.
In terms of communicating to the parents, regarding what's going to be coming down the line and what we can expect, I think that's a priority because, like their number said, only 7% of the parents think that there is any sort of clear program.
I think you make a very valid point, and one of the reasons why I sort of run for this office is because I thought that things could be improved a great deal. I can tell you that there's been a lot of work done so far that have laid the ground for what we want to do in the future. It may appear to be slow, but we actually have done quite a bit of work. I think that your frustration comes from the fact that the superintendent was one person, and there's a lot of work to do in a lot of areas. So I think that you're going to be surprised. It's going to move a great deal faster than you think. I caution you, I teach for a living, And I've seen a lot of teaching initiatives that were done off the cuff. You know, we need to do something right now. And often these, when I teach at the college level, these turn out to be sort of half-assed, with half-assed results. So I think that without going at a slow pace, we want to be effective, but as Jim said, we want to be data-driven, and I think that really matters. So trust us.
Yeah, I think the time frame is important because other parents I've spoken to who know our situation and also have children in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, their discussion is, if it's not going to happen for 3 or 4 years, they've only got one kid. Should they go to the country day school? Should they go to a different school? Should they homeschool? Or should they do something else? So if it's not going to happen, they need to know so they can make a decision.
Well, and I've never said 3 to 4 years. So, I mean, I promised last year we'd get the study done this year, and we've got it done, and we're going to have a timeline by the end of the year, and we'll be meeting with our parents by the end of the year, and we're already going to be meeting with our teachers to start working in curriculum in both English, language arts, and math. We're studying math also. Our math program, as you know, was implemented 3 years ago. It's very easy for our curriculum consultant that comes in and works with our math teachers to implement some of these items now and work with teachers. I need to, since we just got these recommendations, I need to be able to talk to Dr. Calvert and say, what do you have for us as far as how to bring staff development for our teachers? I will tell you, between now and the end of the year, we are booked for staff development. So, you know, I think that what I can promise you is a timeline by the end of the year. I can also promise you that we're working with teachers now on really working on that differentiation. We're seeing it in the classroom. I'm hearing loud and clear from parents. We have to look at the kids that are the 2 standard deviations and above and what we're going to do for them. And there's a lot of research in many different areas on that one. And that's something that we'll consult with Northwestern and say, okay, what's your research show us? Can you help us with a template of, you know, what data should we collect to help make decisions? We want to make good decisions for kids. So we're on it. I can't answer things that happened from the past. As a parent myself, though, I can promise you we are moving as fast as we can. But we have a small administrative team, and we're doing the best we can. And we will continue to accelerate it because I know the parents are very concerned about that. And all of our kids deserve to have their curriculum provided for them at their level. So.
I'm sorry, just you know, one follow-up from that. When you look at the recommendations that were presented, to me they're very broad, and to me it also feels like those were types of things that we should know by experts in this field. So it kind of gets down to when are we going to do something that's tactical, measurable, as an action plan, and a timeline. To wait, in all due respect, to wait 4 months for those recommendations. We know those today. You're a doctor.
I'm not a gifted specialist.
Okay, then maybe we need a gifted specialist. But to wait 4 months for broad recommendations is terribly frustrating.
John Twitchell, 25 Forest Hills Road, in that club. I two things. I would love it if Jennifer Talbot would come here. Of course, I agree. Our kids have been in the program and really benefited from it. But I guess what I really ask is, in this interim period, is if the school can somehow act as a clearinghouse for recommendations for options available in the community or elsewhere, not just Northwestern. There's a lot of kids that are facing this. It's hard as a parent, working parents in particular, to figure out what's available in the community, A lot of people have been through it. It'd be great if the school can serve as a, you know, a sounding board for what options are available out there.
My understanding is that the districts that have parent, teacher, administrator groups,
No, but those districts that have those groups, that provides a time, and then we collect data at those meetings, and we can post those on our website. Because I think you're going to gain a lot from the parents that have had kids in different programs also.
Right.
And we can certainly do whatever we can to support that, providing opportunities to get together and talk about it, go through the timeline, and talk about the resources. Summer is right around the corner. Programs have been developed. There's no reason we can't post information about that and share that with all of you.
Other programs, summer programs, after school programs. There's a lot of stuff. It'd be great to have a resource to go to figure out what those options are.
Anybody else? All right, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. Thank you, Dr. Calvert. We really appreciate your time coming up here and talking to us, and certainly we'll be following up. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're going to move on. You're welcome to stay, but you also can go and take care of it. Okay, we are going to move on to discussion item B, which is a discussion about student fees for 2014 and 2015.
Your comments are great.
Led by
Thank you. I have a kid in eighth grade.
And we may need to do our Mr. Blackmore, where's our other microphone?
They're both
Oh, right here. Sorry, we got it. As you can see in your board packets, we are recommending for the following year that we keep our student fees the same. I'm going to have Jane explain a little bit about our transportation, because I think that'll be one of the topics that we may want to discuss during the evening. But if you can look, we had some comparison with Lake Forest. Some of you had asked me questions about what Lake Forest charges for full-day kindergarten, so that comparison information was in your packets. But we feel strongly that keeping the registration fee for our kids the same is important for our families as the economy is recovering. We have also shared with you numerous times, and the village has also shared, that our traffic flow at the elementary school has been 100% improved with our transportation being the way that it is. So because our fund balance and transportation, why not 214%, I was going to say 215. We're recommending that we do another year with same fees. Would you like to add anything?
I think you covered it pretty well. This was the first year we had not collected transportation fees in about 11 or 12 years, and our ridership was up. We actually added a bus route this year. We actually added a bus route this year because ridership was up. Yeah, we added, I would think, just under 100. It is for us, but we have about 600 students sign up for the bus. They don't ride it every day. In the beginning of the year, they're walking or hiking, but certainly they are registered for the bus and
other questions, comments?
again, this is a committee of the whole, so these particular topics will be covered back at our regular board meeting. But this is the time where we're going to have discussions, ask any questions, and everything is available.
Yeah, the first question is if this is proposed, what was before?
Our proposal is exactly what it is.
Yeah, but
Last year,
what was before? I mean, in other words, full-day kindergarten was $500. What was it last year or the year before?
$2,500.
So what we propose is not to change it.
Not to change it.
Okay. And I just have a question. I'm curious about the gym clothes. we only have, kids don't grow. And then we have milk, and there's no milk they have taken to go. Okay. So I'm just, I just have difficulty with the report. You know what I'm saying? So we propose not to change the full day kindergarten fee, is that it?
We're proposing everything to stay.
Anyway, anything else? We'll move on to board goal 1 indicators.
In your board packets this evening, you have a next draft of indicators for goal 1, which has to do with student learning and achievement. And Jean and myself and the rest of the administrative team have worked on these after working with the rest of the strategic planning group at the beginning, or excuse me, the end of the summer. So would you like for me to walk through each of the indicators, or? Okay. What we're talking about here with a lot of these is that, the way that we're going to be measuring it is that a certain percentage of teachers report that the assessments used in the district accurately inform instruction. So we're going to be doing an assessment of, we're going to be doing a survey with our teachers, and so it will increase by 2% each year. So that the ultimate goal would be that 100% of our teachers or 98% of our teachers are reporting that the assessments that we give accurately reflect the instruction and improve their instruction. So, absolutely, yes. Yes, yes. So that was the first one there. On the reading portion of the ISAT, percentage of students who exceed state standards will increase by 10% to 50%. And so I plotted it out there. The math portion, the same 10% increase. Nope. So I'm sorry. We have about 50% of we have about 40% of our students who are exceeding state standards on the ISAT in the area of reading currently. And so we would like to increase that by 10% to 50%. Yes. Not by 10%. And so that would hold true also for the students who are below standards and academic reporting. The next one, where 100% of our students have individualized learning plans. And so this year is sort of the planning year for that, and then in 2014-15, we would be looking to have individualized learning plans. These are not federal, it's not like an individualized educational plan like an IEP that a student with special education needs would have. But every teacher would be working with every student at K1 and 6 next year to develop an individualized learning plan. So where are we at now in terms of our learning and what goals do we want to set over the course of this school year for each student in the group?
I guess I'm missing something. Howard? I guess I just couldn't hear it. I'm not sure I understand how you measure year 2, 3, 4. Is it systems, grades, K1, 6, 7?
So right now, none of our students have individualized learning plans because we have not created them yet. And so the goal would be that we would begin to work with different grade levels and target our efforts at kindergarten and first grade next year, and then at 6th grade for next year as well, and then add grade levels each year that we begin to work with. It's a good question, and it is something that we are going to have to define. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about on Friday at our professional development day is how to set individual learning goals with each of our students and make them achievable and realistic, and then how does the instruction sort of follow behind that. So I would envision that it would be something along the lines of a goal that they are putting into place with their teacher, followed by a specific plan of activities and courses or different learning activities that they would go on during that school year as an individualized learning plan.
It sounds good in there, it sounds great in theory. My
It does.
concern is that it becomes an exercise in
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that so the thought behind this, though, was that one of the things that came through loud and clear last year during the strategic planning process was getting students to individual mastery. And so if we are going to talk about getting students to individual mastery, so what does that mean for Julie's girls in the classroom? We have to have some way to define it. We have to have individual mastery for Julie's kids and for everybody else's kids. So we can't just say, it is not the intent for it to be an exercise in futility and paper pushing. It is the intent to say, this is how we're going to get your child to individual mastery.
I'm no expert in this by any means, but having heard the presentation of this tour, thinking about individualized learning plans, it seems to me that the best way to approach this is what you're going to do, build a system that has the right groupings and things like that, so the infrastructure is there, which is more important than individualized learning plans. Again, it seems like it would take up a lot of bandwidth, not necessarily.
Also change recommendations, so I'm kind of concerned what we're talking about it.
So let's table that. I think that's a good issue. But I think Chris was talking about something else, which is the number of metrics here. So if we're going to table what we're talking about for the student sub part, then let's address that. Chris, on these, I had the opposite reaction because they're so measurable. Unlike some of the other ones, they're actual numbers. You can measure. And maybe they're numbers just for numbers' sake, and so they're not meaningful. Right. Yeah.
Well, I think the staff has to make sure that these are team.
To be honest with you, there was, and I will not name names, but there was a person in the group when we were putting these indicators who said, well, we really just want to get down to like 2% of the kids that are in academic working. I said, would you like to be the parent, or would you like to be the person who calls that parent and says, yeah, we chose your 2% to not meet standards, because that's in essence what we're saying.
We're okay
You know,
with that.
we're
So by the way, this kid's like sure and like smaller.
All right, I'm coming, I'll be right there. So, all right.
There is part of what we're working on Friday is actually using some of the format that the speaker already has in terms of creating goal-setting documents. MAP already has an internal goal-setting document that they use. The middle school has already started to work on some of that for student conferences. We would not be reinventing the wheel. We would be formalizing the wheel and making it really easier.
What we do with this, as all of you said before, we need something better. So when you look at your 1, your 2, this is what we're going to be bringing you according to our board planning. In a month, for the first year, for instance, we'll be looking at the one that I last year talked about. But probably they're going to be guys that looked at how the went down for like 3 years ago. And so one of the things that came out of our strategic plan was that we need to increase that exceed. Remember those things? So in order to do that for a strategic plan, you figure out where you want to go. So we want to go from 42.
I understand, I see that. I'm wondering why, what we're trying to accomplish now. The reason I'm asking that is just if the guy is cast on this, then I won't question what we're doing, because we decided this is what we're going to do. But if the purpose of this conversation is to say, you know, should we meet all of these goals, or is the right goals, give us, isn't that what we're talking about? Okay, that's what I wanted.
Because these are not cast in stone. Remember, we said we were going to work on it. And actually, I've talked to Echo because this is something that should be done for us. And so Kevin and I have tried to look at the data we have. And we brought back what we could put together with our cuts. But this is still something, you're the ones that are monitoring. Your job as board members is to policy and monitoring progress. So in order to do that, what do you need to see? This is your question.
My understanding of the direction we have at was that we were supposed to look at this column that's over there on the left. That administration that we developed is stuff that was to the right way. So.
And then have the board look at
board
that.
has to approve it.
Right.
So we should look at it on a higher level and say, you know, should we need both measure X, Y, and Z? We're not just
Unless
Extending yourself, overextending yourself, and at least it's measurable and it's reasonable. So
The next step for us would be that we need to meet with ECRA, and we have a conversation scheduled for this week to talk with them about this. I'm very comfortable with where we're at right now in terms of what is on this page. I think that these are good indicators. It's like sort of, this is the temperature check. This is not, absolutely.
And do what we just talked about, doing the math and safety program, which is going to take a lot of them. That's
So-
why there's so much.
Well, but, go ahead, please.
Well, I made a point when Chief here, I started to talk about, for example, the individualized learning. So we're talking about trying to do this for each individual student, which I said could become an exercise in data collection. I don't know.
But we feel pretty good about that. what I want. So, you know, if we can do it all, that's great, but as, you know, priority.
I'm gonna go back to Chris's question, and then I'm gonna answer Julie's question, so hopefully I'll get that. Chris, we have to look at each child, and we have, and math school, actually, and Kevin has a great presentation, and I saw him present to the teachers, and I'm gonna have him come show you how detailed it is. Because through the math scores, we can find out many different components of language arts ability to support your language. And we will set individual goals for you. Math will help us do that. It's very easy to do with math. So your goals are not going to be the same as Leanne's goals. They're going to be the same as Mark's. But it's all dictated through using our data. But it's also through conversation. So we may be all right, and that's
But it's holding us accountable for every single kid. Last year, because you can move the scores ahead by just getting the bottom two up into the meets instead of failing, or you can move the score ahead by having a couple of your different students doing better on the test than they did before. This is saying that every kid is going to get attention, and get moved from whatever level they're on to the next level.
I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to answer Julie's question. In this presentation that Kevin has, you can see how powerful, literally by one assessment, that particular assessment in time, you can do groupings in 5 different areas in language arts for kids. So, for instance, for vocabulary, you have one group of kids. They may be the highest kids in the class. Then for vocabulary, you may have 3 other groups. We have that ability within our data collection, but I'm going to take it to Julie's question now, because I think that's the most important thing we can work. We had to get something down that we believe will work, but don't forget this is a fluid document. When we bring this to you, let's say we bring the first one to you and we only have 43% meaning for year one. And you say to us, well, do you guys still think that's manageable? And we can say, oh, 43, that's good. We made our goal, we're going over, we're going to stick on, don't forget, the next year is 45. So, but we may come back to you and say, there's no, we've done this for a year now, and we're not going to be able to do it. We're going to have to look at redoing things. The important thing as a board is you need to be able to look at the furthest left out and say, okay, you've got to be accountable for every single child, if that's what you are as a board, and how are you going to hold us accountable? And I think, and remember, I wish I would have done this plan in some ways because it's too complicated on many levels. But I do think as you start seeing the reports laid out, because some of the reports you'll all indicators on one page of the report, you will give us feedback and say, this was meaningful, or you will say to us, could you add this the next time? I really like to hear about this group of kids. In science, maybe you decide you're going to add science. So it is a fluid document, and it's how you're going to assess our movement on the goals of the certificate, which remember are very broad. So in this, we get back to, is we put our eyes together and say, okay, knowing that all this data is so it's going to be hard for us to run through it out. We at least have some things that we can use like that, that we know that we place.
What about what we just talked about, what you were just explaining to parents? Timeline, what is that? Why isn't that?
That's a good question. It is in there somewhere. I mean, could give you study. It's a different goal.
Well, no, it's right here, it just says, we got it, or done, so the rest is,
Isn't even captured.
So the baseline percentage is year 1, but then we don't have year 2. Because that was been accomplished, now we need a new, we have to.
Goal. Indicate.
We bet that,
Indicate.
we bet that goal, now we want more meaningful
But I'm going to say one thing before you jump in. Remember that the board gave us direction to come up with as specific indicators as possible and not just have this feedback. That was specific feedback we got. So,
Frankly, it's not whether we start having other studies like that we're actually implementing this program, or we actually see what those kids need.
Yes, but that should be all.
I'm in agreement there.
And moreover, I'm going to say it again, I said it before, but I think we have a baseline. I think we need to, as soon as we can, communicate what that baseline is, what we're doing with it. And look for areas of improvement that sort of low hanging fruit, things that can be done. Still this school year, even I think it's going to be next year. And that should be very
And I mean, proof is sort of in the way to go with our some of that based on solution. And then, other portion of that based on how satisfied others are. Or know a little bit more about that based on we have started to do that as leaders. Our goal as administrators is to steps like
I have an idea. I think it addresses the issue. So, specifically we commit to left-hand column. We have lots of things we're specifically committing to. Maybe we need to, well, we might need to prioritize, but we maybe need one devoted to develop a gifted program. Monitored, that can be.
That's a new goal, but I want
It's under, it's under goal one, but it's.
we need
Specifically, we commit to, I think, we right now have, in the second column, we have, by the end of the, whatever, do the audit, third column, do the audit. I'm saying it needs to be even farther to the left. Development and impact.
the only pushback I'm going to give, because I'm agreeing with you, there are a lot of things when you're developing programs. You have some of the strategic plan items are, have your audit, one number year, take the recommendations and provide the timeline, do this in the third year. That's how I've always done strategic plans. But this board was very, we need specific indicators for this. So we went back and came up with specific indicators based on that feedback. I'm in agreement. I don't need any more.
Do you have any type of roadmap developed at this point for the gifted program?
No, we just got the recommendations. I mean, literally, we just
But
got
in
the
the past,
recommendations.
So it does belong in the second column. It's under, equip students with 21st century learning skills, and that's one of the commitments on the second page. One of the indicators is going to be that we address the needs of the gifted students and the actions that we need to take to get there.
Kevin and I will need to develop that. So that's, we need to.
Because we met the one that's here already, we just now need to build it out.
Yeah, and all the measurable moving forward.
So if we do the same gifted curriculum next year, we want more parents to be satisfied with it.
To understand what the program is, to understand the criteria for being part of the program.
Measure, that the assessment of the gifted students is done, and that's right. Parents are satisfied with that the kids are,
So we will
but
write.
we also want to have that plan in place. I mean, we just. So you guys are supposed to be.
know what our identification is. You know, we do know some of our identification, but that's not even enough. Eric was talking to me about several things that we were working on. We need to be able to, as I was just sharing with parents, we need to be able to identify the kids so that we can make appropriate class placements for them for next year, so we can get appropriate teachers in place. And don't forget, this is just an editorial comment, we're talking about staffing. This all fits into, because as I shared with the parents, you know, some of the implications revolve around staffing. How well we do with what we're doing. I sense frustration. We only have 2 administrators in the district. We've got 2 principals, well, actually, Nate plus the revolving trio at the elementary school. They're doing a great job. But, you know, and everybody is on overload, so we have to look at that and how we're going to manage that, because I tend to panic with that, because we need to be able to meet the needs of every single child we've got, whether they're not at grade level at all, or whether they're 4 or 5 grade levels ahead. That's our responsibility. What we have to at least have a continuing services. So, and remember that was our 5-year goal that we had that. Every year we have to be making progress towards that. And it's your job as a board to look to see, okay, I get this data now. Are we really making progress to that? And if so, great, we need to tell the schools to do not.
So now, it's in place data so the practical thinking school, the NGO is so we use the
We're going to wind up having to look at classes and do some clusters, so kids are serviced.
Okay, so that would be whatever we put in there. You know, stage 1 is fostering.
Deciding what we're going to do with our enrichment team and how
Then
we're
it
going to
would
service
probably
our
a
kids.
review process where we will then, you know, you see, okay, we're trying to do this, it's costing us.
And we can do that, but just a reminder, that's not the specific indicators. That's why, to me,
Yeah, no, I realize.
you have to have a mixture of those. Because when you don't have programs, part of your progress is measuring, starting the process up, getting feedback from parents, getting feedback from kids. You know, what's the data looking like? What data are we going to use?
Well,
I would like to point out too, that just because you have a strategic plan and you have a development your gifted program, doesn't necessarily mean that all of your gifted stuff is going to wind up in that pattern.
Right.
It can still be very important, and it can still have a report back to the board in a pretty short time frame on how that product is going. I'm not saying don't include it, but some of the details.
Oh, right.
I don't know that all of that.
I'm in agreement.
Why don't we've identified a hole, so why don't we allow Kevin and Julie and the staff to fill that hole, update this board goal board, and back to us and show us what they've got. And I think we need to kind of keep it at the top level, and now look at this some more and say, are there other holes in goal 1 and the indicators that, in addition to the gifted program, these other things that are missing or shouldn't be there?
Talked about gifted presentation. Prior to this, we were concerned with our learning as well. The kids who were special challenged. We want to make sure we address that just as aggressively as we can.
That's where we get back to John. That's why I keep saying we have to be aggressive with individual instruction for all kids.
I think that probably covers it. As long as that covers everybody, the stuff about the individual learning plans, it's not just kids, that's kids who need it.
And, you know, I'm going to challenge you. Here's another thing. We have meetings about special education, we have meetings about gifted. I get periodically parents that say, my child is average, you never talk about that. So, you know, it's our job as a school district to be able to offer.
You have 25 kids in class, you have 25 different learning plans, right?
So you look at class size, we've been looking at that for staffing. We look at, I mean, we're fortunate, we have 3 enrichment specialists. We're already talking about, are we using them right now, and do we have the right people in place? That's what we're talking about.
Although, see, I'm going to challenge the underlying assumption that we've got 25 kids
you see Kevin's presentation, it's gonna make sense.
All right, but
Because it's not, it sounds overwhelming, but it really isn't.
And then running my hair might make me. So, we'll see where we are between those, but.
I think that one of the things that we often look at is that there are going to be some things that are really for primary students, there are going to be other things that we need to focus just a small group of students in that classroom. And there will be some days that we need to focus on one or two students in that classroom. And so it is a matter of working with teachers so that they have the skills and abilities to be able to identify what reading is, or to one, or to two, or to three,
It was fantastic.
Gene is really sold it. I will tell you that it
No
was
pressure or anything, but it was great.
literally off the top, so I hope that I can.
The other thing I want to mention, because more of this is coming to me as the process, knowing the identification prior is going to help us with the schedule. Because if we're going to look at things like combining, for instance, third, fourth, little cluster, then we have to have a schedule that's inclusive.
That's the answer. What are we doing now?
Well, we have to identify them.
Right, I know.
Can I also just say that frustration around, it's going to take 3 or 4 years to get a program. Is unreasonable. So here, Dr. Pollard talked at the very beginning of his presentation, like in the days of all of the gifted kids go through 6 for
Yeah.
their instructional programming at 1 period a day. Those days have gone by the wayside.
Right.
So would it take 3 or 4 years to get to that point? Probably to have a blue 6. That's not what we want. So we have to, over the next several months, put in place policies and procedures for identification. In the summer, we can work with our teachers on professional development, talk with Western about children about the possibility of offering a gifted certification professional development course for deciding career this summer, so that already in the fall we have educators who are ready to go. And she's right. Also goes back to that community and preparation piece. If we know that at the end of this school year, kids who are in different neighborhoods are choosing to engage in what they learn, and they're in 4th grade, that means that we need to have their math time in 5th grade at the same time that the 6th graders are.
Right. That's what I was thinking about. If you guys switch up.
And we need to have other alternatives too. I don't even know all the resources that are available in the Western program, so.
But I'm just getting to logistical pieces because, so for example, right now, we're lucky enough to have a high school offer a course at the exact right time for our 8th grade students who need additional programming to be able to go there and from that, within a specified amount of time. With the high school, as they go to Locksley this year, changes. So, but that is a little piece of the logistics whole puzzle that we would put them on and we work with our students. So it's not, we cannot this as, all right, we're going to do this and then we're going to move on. We have to think about this in the long term, understanding that we are constantly building with the goal of improving our program. We want to improve our program. And baseline to say that none of our parents understand what the identification model is. Next year, I think that will be
A lot.
a lot higher. So, those are the things.
Okay, so board goal 1 is a lot, is more than just get it going, just so we remember.
It's all on student achievement.
It's on student achievement. Is there other holes that we think are missed, or are there other indicators that are inappropriate for this line? Are we ready to move on to the next topic? To remind everybody it's already 10 after that.
Third job, you're in this job every single hour, every single day, you're able to trust you to put down everything that you need, and it's an evolving document. You have something on it, to figure out, put it back together. It's the same as us.
And I think as we start preparing our presentations for the first year, we'll say, oh, we never thought of that. Or a board member said, in order to monitor this, I need this. Second.
Moving on?
Second question.
Moving on. Okay, we're gonna move on to D, policy updates, and Jean and
Jean and
Julie will take us through that.
And I have more information on it. Before we do that though, did you guys all meet Jane, right?
Yes.
I'm looking at her. So please shake her hand on the way out. She has done more days. I can't even begin to say, I'm just kidding.
I've been watching, she's been cranking away with it. God knows what you're writing.
Plus she's gonna have a to-do list with me from this board meeting all the days.
You know you have a good secretary. When that happens, you get the to-do list.
I can't. So I'm gonna just turn it over to you guys and I'll help them in some of it. Or in the, no, you want me to walk. Okay. We had a very, very long meeting last night.
How many glasses of wine?
We had a very long meeting. And most of these policies, and I need to thank Kevin for putting this initial packet together, are policies that there are recommendations from us, and they're easy recommendations, and we have to have them done prior to the complaint. However, I also found out some things about a policy today when we get to the personal technology. Thanks to Susan and her history, and then Jim and I did some research on it. So, under board member expenses, if you take a look at that, we decided to keep that one as is. If you look at 2.125 in the middle where it says in addition, all they're doing in this policy is saying that board members can be reimbursed for registration fees or tuition for classes. I am taking out all references that say described in policy below the limits. Any comments or questions? The next one was administrative responsibility of the principal. This one, they wanted to make sure that under the new para laws, that principals could evaluate the assistant principals, so they made those changes better. That's their suggestions. Questions?
That's
Next.
press suggestions.
Presses. Endorsed.
So we just want to see the thumbs up with that.
It took us hours to get to that too. All right, 4.15 is the identity protection. There's a new Identity Protection Act, which, by the way, I will share my, just in point today, my niece was compromised and I'm getting it returned. So you were first and I'm second. But this specifically details confidentiality with social security numbers, etc. And according to Terry, because I went through these briefly with her, we have to have most of the these policies. We do because we issue paychecks.
What about for students?
I do not think we do that anymore. They're given student identification numbers. So, next one, safety. This one really details the fact that when contractors come and work in the building, they require, we require an employee that's on school grounds to submit to a background check. They go through our background check and they pay for it, or they furnish their own background check. So that's all that is. Next one, hiring process and criteria. That one is pulled up too. This one we kept, yeah, we had some questions on that one. So when you look at 5.30, we all decided that on page 3 of 4, where it says, "The superintendent shall ensure that the district does not engage in any investigation or inquiry prohibited by law," we put period, and we crossed off the next four bullet points to present that. This, though, talks about things that the district can and cannot do with hiring. So, all right, anything on that one? 5.50, interestingly enough, we turned it to Terry, but Terry said you guys are bringing up what all the other boards are bringing up. If you look at 5.50 under number 1, where it says or being under the influence of, all the boards are in this big thing because they said, why would you take that out? That's one of the most important parts. So she's going to look at it and tweak this for us, and she'll have something for us to do. So leave that in. She said,
They've taken it out.
she said this policy's come across her desk by the time from last week. And basically she said, so she's working. 5.90. Oh, 5.90, we just wanted to highlight to you the very last paragraph. So page 4 of 4, we recommend the changes, but we also need to highlight the fact that each individual board member must, if an allegation is raised to the board member during an open or closed board meeting, that a student is an abused child as defined by the Act, we must direct or cause the board to direct the superintendent or other designee to comply with the Act's requirements. So we talked about something in closed session regarding a student, and we felt that student met the requirements or the profile of abused child. You would have to tell us directly should go report this to the schools. Questions on that?
Do we need training?
Oh, you don't need training, you just have to, well, that's a good point. You know, Jane, if
Is
you
this
could
the
put it,
legal definition for it?
if you could put in my notes, Kevin has it too. It is a low standard, but I know that there's, right?
She would have an obligation legally to report it, but sometimes people say things like, well, but no, it's better to be a more than cost for the other. And this is saying we have to hold in mind that information.
Next one, ethics, 5.120. We didn't even think the changes in this were even that important. Terry said we did not have to add the change, so we're going to keep it as is. That's all right. 5.200, we are going to table because it is a personnel. That one I'm skipping and coming back, because that's a big, hot one. Chris briefly, we're not gonna, I'm gonna give you copies of things so you can review it, it's a hot one. 5.200, Terry Hodges is gonna look at it, but it has to run the next 60 days. Most likely, we're gonna keep it as is and change it the next one. So, the next one is on student teachers. Okay, the one thing we're gonna do on this one is check to see if people that do our background checks will also check the murder and violent offender list. That was our note. So other than that, we voted to keep those changes.
That's not automatically assumed.
No.
Right now,
It's a specific, so there is a specific list that
It's not
the
necessarily
fingerprints
covered in one.
are to make sure that you are not a any secret. The
Then
law
there's a separate
specifies
one.
that you must check.
I think right now, all says that we don't check the class as
Find these
It takes a little while.
Do you have the sexual harassment, sexual
automatically done, but there's a different list that's called this murder and violent offender. So we're gonna have, when we hire new employees, we're gonna have this company see if they'll work for us.
Already
Policy,
being checked.
we're just talking about children.
I didn't know that, I just listened to. It is listed, it is.
And that's where we said we
It's
did.
just a matter of time.
You're on camera. You're on camera.
Okay,
To your knowledge, anyway.
so, that's how far we said we would get into this. I need to give you some background history on the personal technology and social media. You should have had a new copy of this at your desk. If not, it should look like 5.125 or some yellow highlights on it, and it's 4 pages.
This is good through.
No, those are in the next one. I said we were only going to get through the section 5, because I knew we were going to be running late. All right, so this policy, let me tell you, 3 of our board members in the old board spent a lot of time in this policy. And what we found out is that it was not in our official policy manual. However, it does show up in the board book that it was approved. So,
But it just never got
it
incorporated.
just never got incorporated. So Susan was nice enough to send it to me through the board book, which was great, by the way. Instead of spending time on it, I'd like to see what the previous board spent time on, and maybe we could just adopt their work and any other changes that were recommended.
So there's new changes to the old version
Right.
that we have already updated.
Right. You got it.
We spent,
What was highlighted in yellow
is the best one?
was what was highlighted, okay, here's the other thing. When the board approved it, they approved it red line strikeout, and it was never updated.
Never cleaned up, right? I wonder if before we study these, do we have this little like
Yes.
policy to look at?
Yeah,
With the
I just found this
board-
out today.
Right,
so-
oh, I know, we talked about it. So. Yeah. Somebody can go to what we approved last time, compare it
Which
to
is this.
what's now being presented.
And
as
see
a
if we have to
change,
add it.
And see if we have to add anything into the one that was approved. Clean up the red line.
We'll clean it up, and then I'll run it by the village.
That would be good, because otherwise we're going to move into.
Nope, I just wanted to keep you guys updated on this, because we talked about it last night, and then I went to the house.
Well, it's the waste. Please.
It will not be a waste, and I want to thank Susan for getting it to me so fast.
How did you know it was?
Because I texted her, I told her the problem. She talked to me about it.
I know, I had done
But you knew that it wasn't in our policy?
No, she told me it wasn't in the policy, and I went,
After I went into this morning.
But this, maybe help, like Jane in the future will be able to use my, when Jane and I were preparing for the complaints and that, literally went into our board policies, looked at the date that was last updated, looked at the date that was last recommended and passed, and if they were different, then
Because then it shows we reviewed them. So even the ones that we decided we're not going to do anything with, it will still show that we reviewed it. So that's really good. That concludes our report.
Thank you.
We had a very good meeting last
That
night.
was great.
I
Appreciate it.
recommend doing another one tomorrow.
And, okay, so we're going to move on to item E, which is the Lake Fork Middle School writing stuff.
is one of the complaints here, the board of education the start date for we have in front of you the general summary of what writing start is, we have it what it does,
Typically, the Rising Star documentation for the state is usually on the consent, because it's just something. If it's something you don't want on consent, you can have it on consent.
Item F, 2014-2015 proposed school calendar. I think that looks like this.
Well, I think the big issues with the calendar are, I think our biggest, what I got from all of you is we need to align as much as we could with it. That's our biggest.
Can I also say that one of the things that we had asked for is filtering early release days, so that they're so having these recommendations that we do the second Monday of every month is an early release day.
They do all Mondays.
They do all Mondays, and that could be something we talked about doing. That is a contractual issue.
But we also don't want to miss that much instruction. So. It aligns with Lake Forest, if parents want our families.
And we were looking for something that was, we didn't want to do the second, third.
No, and I appreciate that very much. I mean, you know, as a working mother, I say go for Friday.
Exactly.
It's easy, somebody can work on Fridays anyway.
So the Friday, so think about that. You work from home on Fridays, so we're trying to have teachers and make professional development on Friday.
That's what the early release is.
Exactly.
It does seem to me every other Monday for early release seems like a lot of early release.
How much a month? Once a month, it's the same amount
Second
this year,
Monday.
it's just.
Second Monday of the month.
Second Monday.
Not every
It's
second.
the same amount we have this year, it's just, they're not gonna go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all different times of the month.
But I'm just, and it has to be, I mean, there's no way to do more at home.
It's gotta be, you gotta have a full day of school, which is 5 hours.
And so we use those to hold professional development, ongoing professional development, but also the committees. So let's do that, we talk next year, all that, additional committees, additional opportunities for staff to get involved. Those would be the plan for those committees.
But even then, it's not gonna be that much different than this year, because we have the same amount of days. So, no, we use that time. We use that time. And school districts now are really looking to do that more monthly. They're, I mean, actually we're going minimum right now. But we need to make sure that we are fully ready to look at weekly early release, and we're not ready. Our kids need to be in school.
And are we starting school at the same time as Lake Forest?
No, they are starting school on the 25th. But we're starting, we wanted to have at least a couple days in, and we will way into June. We start.
I know, it really is.
I would challenge you guys to come in and do the calendar.
Well, but they have the same.
No, they don't have the same calendar. No. They have some of their days for like finals and all that count as regular school days. They are very. I didn't know why it was 67.
67 and
67 and 115 don't know.
I don't know if there's any pushing to not have, we should cut into that.
No, they're full days. I mean, otherwise, here's what I would tell you. If you guys wanted to hold off, we would be into, literally, if we had snow days, it would be June 12th. I would tell you, you would find 50% of the community that would disagree. You can never get a calendar.
That the parents just stand.
I'm gonna get, I will, 50-50, it always is, everywhere. Well,
school
today is
counselors,
sensitive.
start calling us.
In general.
You weren't here for
They
that.
have semester exams.
Oh, that's right. Why does everybody else do that? That's not honestly.
But then you get out, I think their last day of emergency is April 21st.
That's what Julie's right. The weather stinks. August is such a nice month.
You guys can go talk to Mike.
All right.
To the point.
Oh, I have lost.
By the way, I do want to share, speaking of Mike, Lake Forest brought all your books. That was a special gift from them, and they should be doing that since I gave them the idea to do that.
Is this the one that?
They're fantastic books, yes.
Well, they should have sent us to China.
Yeah. Books.
I'm not even touching
Send
it.
us, where are the airline tickets?
I would encourage you, though, take a look at the nights they're offering these community conversations. It's a great book.
Who is it we think for the,
Pardon me?
who is it?
It is the District 67 Board and the 115 Board, both your school districts. And they are having community conversations on the book, and they drop the books off for all of you. So, probably like 7 would be the best. I can give you a secretary's email. That's the fastest way to get a hold of them. So,
Or if it was easier for you, in America, you can see numbers tonight.
Please,
Please
take
do.
it for us.
Is there any other comments on the proposed school calendar? Do we have any public comment?
No.
Aye.
Good and thank.
Notice that there's no public comment. May I have a motion to adjourn at
thank you, everybody.
9:30? So moved, moved, second. All in favor? Aye, opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.